Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I want to first acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose lands we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. And certainly here in the history department, we really take this to heart and are really proud of the fact that we have a nationally renowned program in American Indian history and faculty and students and alumni who are doing really terrific work. So with that, I'm Sarah Chambers. I'm the current chair of the history department, and I'm really happy to have you joining us this evening for the March edition of the History Book Club. For those of you who it may be your first time attending, we feature books of alumni, of faculty, and we will start off in a little bit with an introduction to the book from the author, and then we have a conversation on the book for a half hour or so with our interlocutor, our special guest expert on the area of the book, and then we'll take questions from you. So at any point, you can go ahead and write your questions into the chat, and when we get towards the latter part of the hour, I will read those questions to our guests. I'm happy to have Clayton Smith with us here, who organizes the book club and keeps us on tasks and solves technological problems. So he'll be waiting in the wings and helping us out as we go forward. So it's really a great pleasure to be joining you and having a conversation here about this book, Athanasios, Souliotis, Nikolaidis, and Greek Irredentism, A Life in the Shadows. I'm a specialist in Latin American history, but before I got into Latin American history, I dabbled a little bit as an undergraduate in modern Greek studies. And in fact, I had the great pleasure to study with Professor Theophanis Stavru and do a study abroad trip with Student Project for Amity Among Nations in Greece. And so now I have been his colleague. So I went from being a student to being a colleague, and both have been a wonderful honor and pleasure. And so for me, it was also very exciting to get a chance to dip back into modern Greek history with this wonderful book by our guest, John Athanasios Mazis, who was also a PhD student of our program, studied with Professor Stavru, and I think finished up just before I came to the history department. So I didn't have the pleasure of overlapping with him, and he's now chairing one of our institutions across the river at Hamline University. So it's a very interesting book. And with this, I'm going to turn things over to John so that he can get us started talking about how this book project came about, and then have a conversation with Theo Stavru.
Thank you very much. Just a correction. I am not the exalted chair of the history department. My colleague, Professor Catherine Bjork is. I am very happy. Thanks all of you for being here. And particularly, I'm very happy to see among the attendees former partners in crime of mine as graduate students of the University of Minnesota. It's very nice. Some of them I've seen quite often, some of them not so much. So I'm glad to see them again. I am also very glad to see a couple of former students who decided to stop by and see if I'm still on the ball, or if old age is taking its toll on me. I am also very happy and honored to see some of my colleagues here at Hamline. And above all else, I'm very gratified to see some of my current students at Hamline. I think their participation or attendance is almost heroic, given the fact that they put up with me day in and day out for years. So to volunteer for an extra hour or so is something special. So thank you very much. This book is the continuation, if you wish, of a previous book I wrote on Ion Draoumis, and they both the idea was conceived while a graduate student at the University of Minnesota, but of course at that time other priorities were ahead, and I could not work at that subject as much as I would like. So I wrote the Ion Draoumis book a few years ago. And of course, Ion Draoumis is famous in Greece to this day, and many people hold him in high regard, and even those who don't hold him in high regard think he's an interesting person in many ways. On the other hand, his best friend and collaborator in many ways, Souliotis Nikolaidis, is unknown. And after I finished the Draoumis book, and I was thinking about my next project, I was already intrigued by Souliotis Nikolaidis, so I decided to work on him. Now, why do biography in this day and age, which is not the most popular genre, is a story that maybe we can take up later at a little bit of length. But what I was trying to do in this particular book, to focus on this book, is first of all, of course, bring the life of Souliotis Nikolaidis to a little bit of wider attention. His work was, as the title suggests, in the shadows. He worked undercover for many, many years. And I thought he offered great services to his country, and he paid a price. And by paying a price, I mean, he could have stayed in the regular army under regular conditions, not endanger life and limb, and retire with a nice pension and with a high rank and live happily ever after. But he was a true idealist. So I tried to bring his life into focus. But that's only part of it. He comes at a very interesting time in Greece, but more than Greece. He is one of those people who comes of age at the turn of the 20th century. Always, the turn of any century is a time of hope and anxiety on many people, but of course, the end of the 19th and early 20th century, it was particularly so, with new ideas coming forward, with old enmities and old problems that needed to be settled, or at least people thought needed to be settled, coming to the fore. For Greece is also a very important time. It's in the 1890s that Greece declares bankruptcy. It is in the 1890s that Greece loses a very short but painful and costly war to Turkey. So by 1900, you have intellectuals wondering, who are we? Where are we? Do we belong with the East? Do we belong to the West? Bring some shades of Samuel Huntington's and the Clash of Civilization and all those kind of things. Nikolaidis, or Souliotis Nikolaidis, is in that generation, and he has those questions himself. This is also the time that the Ottoman Empire appears to be in its final days. We know, of course, that came a couple of decades later, but it looks bad. And then the question is, what is going to happen to the territory, in this case, the Balkan part of the Ottoman Empire, when the Ottoman Empire is gone? And we have roughly the area that is today northern Greece, southern Bulgaria, what is today the Republic of North Macedonia, which is at that time an Ottoman province. We have competition between bands of Greek armed men and Bulgarian armed men trying to protect their people, intimidate opponents, use any means necessary to create reality on the ground. So when the Ottoman Empire retreats, whatever area it is, following the Greek, the Greek paradigm or the Bulgarian paradigm, they will come under those countries' control. And this is where Souliotis becomes important, a young idealistic lieutenant of no significance. He doesn't come from a prominent family. He doesn't have financial or other means. He's destined to spend the rest 20, 30 years in the army. That's where he comes to the fore. And he's tasked with creating an undercover organization, first in Thessaloniki, the great city in what is today Greek Macedonia, and later in Constantinople. And he succeeds brilliantly. One of the revelations is that this man was a natural organizer of secret societies. There's no, maybe there's a book today in the CIA or other secret services of how to foster an insurgency, but of course back then there was no such thing. He seems to be a natural, and again, he uses means that today would make us, I don't know, for lack of a better term, queasy. But at that time, they were the methods, violence, threat of violence, and so on and so forth, to achieve your ends. What is more interesting in many ways, in this first part in Thessaloniki, to me is more interesting, is his transformation. Here is a tough man, a dedicated man, an idealist who has a kind of a road to Damascus epiphany. One day he sees the Turkish authorities who have hanged a Bulgarian partisan. And he looks at him and he looks at his family crying, and he writes in his journal that he looks like one of us. He looks like a Greek peasant, and his family looks like a family of a Greek peasant. And I think this was the time that he does not question the righteousness of his cause, but he understands that somebody else has a cause that is equally legitimate as his. The next time we see him is in Constantinople, today's Istanbul, where he tries to do the same thing, but more remarkably, he becomes involved in electoral policies, as politics, as the young Turks come to power and we have elections, and he becomes something like behind the scenes organizer, lobbying group, and fixer. And he's quite successful in the first Ottoman elections, who are quite free, actually. In December of 1908, the Greek community of the Ottoman Empire elect a number of representatives in the first Ottoman parliament, and they have some kind of sway. Finally, the most remarkable thing, in my view, happens when he and Ion Dragoumis concoct a strange, utopian, maybe, idea, what came to be known an Eastern idea or Eastern Federation. They come to the conclusion that the great powers will never allow Greece to achieve its Irredentis goals, maybe recreate an empire, maybe take control of Constantinople and the Straits. The two friends realize that this is too sensitive an area for the British or the Russians to allow to fall in the hands of anybody. So they concoct this idea of a federation between the Greeks and the Turks primarily, and other ethnic groups, a federation which will bring peace to the area, at least internally. You are not going to have ethnic groups fighting ethnic groups, but also will create a country that will be strong enough to push back on intrusion from the West or the East. Russia is a viable power at this point, and at the same time allow for internal autonomy. Interestingly enough, Ion Dragoumis and Nikolaidis to some degree use the Austro-Hungarian Empire as an example, where two partners are together, but they are allowed, ethnic groups are allowed to have their own cultural autonomy within the empire. To us, it sounds utopian, and indeed it never came to pass. But I came to appreciate how at least they were willing to think outside of the box, as we would say. Finally, I noticed a little bit from in the case of Souliotis Nikolaidis, his life after the First World War, and how now an older, mature person who came of age in the 19th century is facing Europe in the interwar years. And he has some of the same problems, some of the same questions. Where is my country? Where is the world I knew? He's naturally conservative of the old style. So although he appreciates some of the finer points or more interesting points of fascism, at the same time, he cannot make that leap to these new ideas. And of course, as a good nationalist, he rejects socialism and communism offhand. He seems a little bit, like many others in Europe at the time, among the people of his background, lower middle class, military, disciplined, nationalistic, to be kind of lost actually in this new world. The final thing I'm going to say is the personal gratification I received when, after many, many years of trying to receive reward for his services in the form of promotion to the rank of general, he retired as a lieutenant colonel. And more importantly, and I really found that one of the most enduring characteristics of his, as he is laying dying, he's worried that a lieutenant colonel's pension is not going to be good enough for his widow. So he fights tooth and nail to become a general, he's already retired, of course, in recognition of his services, but also secures a better pension for his wife. And lo and behold, about 3 weeks before his death in 1945, the Ministry of Defense, in its wisdom, saw fit to promote him to the rank of Major General, and his wife did receive a better pension, which I'm sure she appreciated. Thank you for listening to a brief introduction, and I am sure Professor Stavro would have some interesting comments of his own.
Well, first of all, thank you, John, for taking time to write this book. I remember once a professor of mine said to me, do not undertake to write anything unless it's an important topic, or if it's not an important topic, make sure you make it important. Well, here you really have been working with a fairly important topic which has been neglected. And I think it has been wonderful to see you bring to life a very important personality, despite the fact that nowadays straight biographies or traditional biographies are not very encouraged. But yours is not a traditional biography in the sense that you have really brought this person and made him even more of an important historical phenomenon because you contextualized him so beautifully. You contextualized him in Greek history, in Balkan history, in Ottoman history, indeed European history. This is really quite an accomplishment, I think. And you did it especially well, I think, by resurrecting him in a way, side by side with his closest friend, Ion Dragoumis, who is the one who has been receiving glory all these years, and as if he was the original thinker, and that Souliotis Nikolaidis was just simply a second fiddle. I think if we can use the word revisionistic, as well as really contributing to scholarship, in addition to bringing this very important character to our attention, you also are revising history by reminding us that he was not a second fiddle, that he was, in terms of ideas, even though not in terms of reputation, the equivalent of Ion Dragoumis, a fascinating individual at all levels. So you've done a remarkable job, and I want to congratulate you on that. Secondly, I would like to say that I like the style of this book. Now, first of all, it asks about the markings of a scholarly enterprise, and you demonstrate good command of all the secondary literature, but also the archives of the person that you are trying to resurrect. So that is a major accomplishment. But I like your style, because this is really rather conversational style. It has the scholarly apparatus, but it doesn't have the scholarly pretentiousness, in the sense that it can be read enjoyably, and a person can get engaged with it. And that's the only way you can really write the kind of book you wrote about a person like Athanasios, Souliotis, Nikolaidis. Now, in your beautiful introduction, you left out, it seems to me anyway, one of the most important terms that one has to keep in mind. And that is the term that's in your title, Irredentism. In other words, basically, this is the life story of people who are witnessing the emergence and the tribulations of a new state, the first one out of the Ottoman Empire, which has all kinds of ambitions and all kinds of problems, but it was only 1/3. It contained only 1/3 of the Greeks who are really spread throughout the Ottoman Empire. And the subtitle of your book is suggesting the concern that a good many politicians and intellectuals had with really this problem of irredentism, how you are going to be able to bring together these people who are outside, in other words, of the Greek state, in some kind of arrangement with the modern Greek state. Now, and we all know that as the other states in the Balkan Peninsula are becoming independent, they too have their irredentist dreams. They all had their imagined communities, because at one point in the past, they also, all of them, really had big empires in the region, and now they were, which suggests conflict, right? So it's very important to know, in other words, that as by the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, this term irredentism is extremely important, because that's going to be the main reason why Souliotis and Dragumis and many other intellectuals, by the way, are going to be involved in setting up programs, organizations, in order to put themselves at an advantage, so that if indeed the Ottoman Empire collapsed, then they will be able to move that way. So I want to emphasize this part of the title of your book, Irredentism. It's extremely important to keep in mind, because the entire book really hinges on what happened to this concept of irredentism. In the beginning, in other words, is an attempt to make sure the Greeks had an advantage in getting part of Macedonia into the Greek state. That's one reason he went as an agent in Thessaloniki and then in Constantinople. But then there is a huge leap. That's the thing that's so fascinating. A leap from really trying to take Macedonia and make it part of the Greek state at the expense of Bulgaria or any other Balkan state. All of a sudden, after the Young Turks revolt, because they were disappointed by the policy of the Young Turks, who they thought were going to be more open, etc., to all the nationalities, in other words, they are going to make this huge leap forward and advance this idea of the Eastern Federation, which in many respects, as you pointed out, it was really, up to a point, some kind of a utopian idea. But anyway, basically, the story ends with these people hanging on the possibility of an arrangement that does not correspond with the first phase of irredentism, but with a more grandiose plan of bringing all these people in the region together. All right, I will stop there in terms of my overall reaction to the book, which is really a big plus. And I'm very grateful that you wrote this book, and I think people should be able to read it in your style, which makes even a three-barrel Greek name like Athanasios, Souliotis, Nikolaidis, even accessible to English-speaking people. And by the end of the book, they will be able to pronounce it correctly and what have you. With all those thoughts in mind, and you know, John, I'm going to say one more thing. I really enjoyed the book very much. It brought me an awful lot of memories of my studies of when I was a graduate student of this period. Because, as you said, the country was in trouble. They were looking for some major leaders who are going to get them out of this, intellectuals as well as politicians. That's why Nietzsche was very popular at the time. The idea of the Superman, some kind of a Superman is going to come up, in other words, to get them out of this mess and what have you. But here now, I end with that, and I have 3 or 4 questions, and following the advice of Sarah, whom I respect, instead of really putting them all one after the other, I would like to really raise them one by one and give you a chance to respond, so that the people who have read the book will have a chance to review it through your comments. And those who haven't read it, I hope will become excited enough to want to read it. And these are the 3 questions. The first question is, this dream, this idea, this Eastern Federation or Eastern idea, which later on became known as the Eastern Federation or Confederation, and so on. It was in the mind of these 2 friends. It was also in the minds of some other intellectuals. Okay, no doubt about that. And in fact, really, the idea began a little bit earlier in the 90s by some people. They wanted to do something about the Balkans, right? Okay, now my question is this. Since these people started their mission with the blessing of the Greek government, both in the side and so on, I want to know, and I didn't really get it from the book, and I'm sure you know, how seriously did people in the Greek government, for whom Athanasios actually looked at this project? Did anybody think, wow, maybe we ought to forget some of these crazy ideas of Irredentism or the Megali idea, and perhaps we should? So my first question is this. Was the project actually ever put before any major politicians? Did that politician do anything with it?
No, well, first of all, thank you for saying very nice things about my book. It is nice to hear nice things from anyone, but especially from you, for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go into them now. No, they did not. This was a private talk between those 2 and some others. They were both deeply suspicious of the Greek state as an apparatus. They say there are 2 entities here, the Greek state and Hellenism. Hellenism is the nation that is bigger than the state. But on the one hand, the state embraces Irredentism. On the other, the state's #1 priority is the preservation of the state and the preservation of the privileges of those who are now in power. So to offer this new idea, it will not be accepted. So they never really present them even informally to people in power, to the prime minister or the minister of foreign affairs, although they knew those people and they collaborated them. It was more of a dream, if you wish, and of course the dream started somewhere around 1970. You know, this is a process. This is not an idea that was formed and was finalized in a year, right? And of course, by 1912 we have the Balkan Wars, and by 1914 we have world wars. Now, they keep thinking about it, but the idea of presenting it is not really in their plans.
So it really is it's not a missed opportunity. It's really a beautiful dream.
Yes.
One of those beautiful dreams that unfortunately did not have a chance. Oftentimes I say crazy plans in history, when we don't think they could possibly work. Once they work, they can do an awful lot of damage. But here was an amazingly beautiful dream to find ways to cooperate among the various peoples in the region, but either because of the changing attitude of the Young Turks, or because of the First World War, the Balkan Wars, the First World War, and then, of course, the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, the conditions were not really right. So I don't think that comes out, at least it did not come clear enough for me as to whether you lamented it as a missed opportunity, but maybe I missed it, where it stayed in the realm of ideas, that it really was not. Now, these two people, both Souliotis and Nikolaidis and Ion Dragoumis, they were fairly conservative. And one of them was assassinated in 1920. Whereas Souliotis, Nikolaidis lived on until 1945, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let me, however, I frankly was very much excited by the fact that these two people who started out as agents, all of a sudden, through the process, they'll experience a transformation, that here we live in this region, and we are joined by the same sea. And I wondered if there is any way by which we could live together. Actually, when I read your book, I wondered if we should send a copy to the current Prime Minister of Greece and also to President Erdogan. I think maybe they should read the ideas of Dragoumis and of Souliotis as they matured in the Eastern Federation and what have you. But here is my second question. My second question was this. I know that that's a fantastic activities that Souliotis had in Constantinople when he went there representing an insurance company. In Salonika, he was representing a German sewing machine company. I mean, it is really kind of primitive cover agents, so to speak, but it worked for them, okay? But here he is there and working as a lobbyist, as you said, with the Greeks, the Armenians, the Jews, all these various people, in order to affect the elections that were going on. And he did a pretty good job. Now, here is my question, the second question. Did Souliotis discuss this idea? After all, it's the heart of the study. Did he discuss it with any Ottoman citizens besides Greeks? In other words, you made a few references that there were young Turks, reform-minded people and what have you. And then later on, they had their own nationalistic problems too. The question then is, did he discuss it with any Ottoman intellectuals who are not Christians? I think this is very interesting.
I don't know about it. Well, intellectuals, politicians. Yes. He was very close to a number of old-style politicians, Ottomans, right? That they're still, but he was also in contact, very much so, with modern Turkish politicians who were not part of the Young Turk political party. So he was in contact with them, and yes, they were talking about some kind of an entity. And I'm not sure exactly how far their conversation went, because remember, by 1999, the Young Turks become much less open, and they are manipulating elections, and they're arresting people and so on and so forth. So that window of opportunity closed. But yes, for quite a while, he is in direct contact, and indeed he's financing some of the smaller Turkish political parties. Because he made, as you mentioned, the insurance company, he made a lot of money out of it that he used. I mean, he made the money, but he didn't use it for himself. He used it for his undercover activities, and sometimes without the knowledge of the Greek government where he's going to spend it. And he was he supported some young Turk, modern, democratic or Ottoman politicians. Absolutely, yes.
Well, because I know that there were Greeks and other ethnic, non-Turkish ethnics who were working with the Sultan before, and they also were making suggestions. You make reference to Kara Theory, you make reference to Zafirios, you make reference to a doctor by the name of Rokas, and things like that. These are interesting people that are having access to politicians, but I was curious to see to what extent did Turkish intellectuals were involved with this and so on. Now, Yanis, I have one or two more questions, if I may ask. The last one is really a little bit, I think, cute. But before we get into that one, I want to get really also to the personality of our friend. And the reason I like your book, by the way, one of the reasons I like your book is because you didn't start by saying he was born on such and such a day, and then gradually, it's not a traditional biography in that sense. I mean, it's nice when you start with a person on his dying bed and making sure that his widow is going to have a good pension. And then that's nice. And then you go backwards. But I was wondering, really, the personality of these two people was so different. I mean, Raoul is flamboyant. I mean, the intellectuals knew him, the way his family was very important and what have you. And to this very day, as you said, he is very well spoken of and loved or criticized, but still open. Our friend Athanasios Souliotis Nikolaidis, and by the way, for those of you who wonder why that dash, it's because Nikolaidis was the name he assumed when he was undercover. And then after a while, he liked to have it, and he signed his name, dash, Souliotis Nikolaidis. But anyway, on the other hand, he was really a person who was kind of a loner, as you said. And in some respects, it doesn't fit at all the image of an intellectual or somebody who have an exciting life. Even his sex life or sexual life wasn't really very exciting, I think, even though there were a few little scandals. But who doesn't have scandals? As an American Hispanic comedian said, if you push it hard, he said, you'll find a chihuahua in everybody's bed if you are not careful. So even Souliotis had a few problems, but nothing like what some of the other intellectuals or politicians of the time. Okay, in connection with that, why did you not make more use of some of the other really supermen in Greek culture at this time, who, for example, knew some of their contemporaries and they wrote about them, and who had visions of Greece? I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying you can tell me if you want a book like that, Mr. Stavro, go and write one yourself. You can say
when you write a biography, I think you are right, find something interesting, but also find somebody that, in my view, that you neither like nor dislike, so you can be as dispassionate as possible. I identify more with Souliotis Nikolaidis, not of what he did, because I haven't done that, but As you said, Ion Dragoumins was part of the elite. He was destined to be the leader. Nikolaidis, Souliotis Nikolaidis was not destined that. He was a person like most of us. He was not destined to lead, but he was destined, or he was prepared to work for it. And I came to appreciate enough of Superman, enough of super intellectuals. He laughed, he kept teasing Ion Dragoum. He says, "You're so intellectual, you talk and talk and talk, and you do nothing. You are, you are debating among yourself and you confuse yourself. It's time for action." And, those are the people who are needed in such an endeavor. And then it's so easy to put them aside then after the great men have done their job, right? The Dragoumis, the George Washington or whoever, then we forget about the average person.
Well, you answer my question, and that's perfectly legitimate. In other words, I think that's one of the reasons why some of my colleagues in Athens who read your book told me they liked it. It's because you didn't try really to connect him with the big names that everybody already knows, but that in his own right, you resurrected him. You discuss his accomplishments, and you made him side by side with one of the idols, so to speak, of Greek intellectual and political personalities. But here is my last question, and this is the one which I think is fun. I really agree with you, because it's people like Souliotis that would make the ideal Near East James Bond. Now, I think there is an interesting story here for a man who looks totally unpretentious, fairly harmless, with selling sewing machines or insurance in the two big cities of the Near East, because after Constantinople or Istanbul, Thessaloniki was the cosmopolitan center. And suppose you convince somebody to do a really fictional account of Souliotis and come up with a biography, a book. Is there anything in this biography that you have that you would like to add to make it really a film that would not necessarily compete with Zorba the Greek, but which would nevertheless be something that people can enjoy and at the same time get an appreciation of what was going on in the Near East at this time? That really is the serious part of the question.
It's a big canvas. Can you imagine a movie with Constantinople, Istanbul as the background? Even Thessaloniki to a lesser degree, but also his ideas and what he wants to accomplish. Yes, it could be a great spy movie or sabotage movie or something like that, again, of the adventure. I also see somebody in the comments says, would he have such discussions with Ottoman Jews in Palestine? He had discussions in 1915 with the British. Greece is not in the First World War yet. And he says to the British, because he was well connected with Christians in what is today Syria and Lebanon. And he said, if we provide them with weapons and some specialist officers, the Christians of Syria can start an uprising against the Ottoman Empire, divert their attention, and maybe help us win the war. And I like to think, boy, nothing came of it. And there he was, before Lawrence of Arabia. We could have had Souliotis Nikolaidis of Arabia, which doesn't roll off the tongue as nicely, though. So
now, Sarah, I appreciate your patience. I think I have taken plenty of time. I'd rather have other people ask John questions. Thank you.
So John already jumped into the chat and saw Jackson Luton's question and has addressed that. So others can feel free to add questions. I might just add my own question, John. Thinking as a historian and thinking about the sources you had, I thought it was interesting that Souliotis Nikolaidis published books at some point about his operations, first in Macedonia and then in Constantinople. But then presumably you also have, you cite correspondence, you must have access to his personnel records and the
Right,
Ministry of Defense and so forth. And I was wondering both sort of how you balanced reading these kinds of sources and sort of to what degree and what was the context in which Souliotis Nikolaidis could kind of reveal what had been undercover activities in these published books. And then how do you read, are there passages where you think, well, here he's not being completely forthcoming, and maybe in these other parts he is?
Yes, I had that feeling particularly. Well, let me, to this day, I don't know, did he ever participate in an act of violence? He gave the orders. Did he himself? He was quite capable. He seems the person. On the other hand, he was very careful because, of course, he had a bigger role. So I cannot say with certainty that he himself personally participated, but he did order. He did order act of violence. When it comes to the Eastern Federation, on the one hand, he says those nice ideas about a federation, a brotherhood. On the other, he keeps in the back of his mind, but if that does not work, the Greek minority in the Ottoman Empire would be wonderfully placed to take a part away, and maybe with the help of Armenians. He was thinking of Armenians as a kindred people, and rightly so, I believe, and then we can create something else. So he's not always forthcoming. Or maybe one could say he's prudent to have more than one plans in. He wrote, yes, a great person in his life was his wife. He married late in life. He did not have any children, and his wife became kind of. She was the executor of his will and papers mainly, and she helped a lot in put them in order and give access to scholars while she was alive. I did not find any great secrets in his archives, and they were not. And as an aside, I remember the now Professor Kift telling me once, be careful, don't go to the archives thinking you're going to find the secret there. Sometimes you go and it's very little, and you have to work with what you have. And he was absolutely right, of course. So no secret. What I found very helpful was that you could see the character of the man when he's talking to himself, when he's writing for himself, then he's freer, and you can see his sensitive side. I mean, Ion Dragoumis, his best friend, kept saying, he is the hardest man I know. He's the toughest man I know. I am soft. He is hard. Everybody thought of him as a tough man, and he was. But then when you read his private thoughts, there is a much more sensitive man. He was, as I said, he was not an intellectual in the maybe in the conventional sense, but he was intellectually curious. He never stopped learning. He went to school when he didn't have to go to school. He happened to be in Paris for government work, and he went to the university and attended some political science. He was very much interested in political science. He took leave of absence after the First World War, and he spent almost 2 years in Berlin. And among other things, he was, again, for his private knowledge and edification, which I find, quite frankly, amazing for somebody at his age, at his place in life. Very easily he could do a whole bunch of other things. So it seems to me here is a man with, at a minimum, intellectual curiosity worth noting and applauding.
Are there other questions from those of you in attendance? Oh, one just a big long one jumped up from Andy Steck. Where do you place Dragoumis in the broader intellectual history of proto-fascism, given his intellectual division of the nation and the state? Speak more toward his division between the nation and the state, especially within the context of the birth of the nation state at the beginning of the 20th century. This seems particularly interesting given Greece's position today as a pillar of EU skepticism and the popularity of thinkers like Carl Schmitt.
That's what happens with smart former students. They come back and ask you tough questions. That's what young Andy is doing. Yes, Ion Dragoumis, I have called him, and I found myself criticized, and I don't mind, a proto-fascist. Ion Dragoumis, of course, was assassinated in 1920, so fascism is in its infancy when he is, but his ideas, if you look, and Professor Stavro mentioned earlier how popular Nietzsche was in Greece and other places, so people like Ion Dragoumis, and to some degree Souliotis Nikolaidis, were interested in those radical ideas. Of course, keep in mind, they are interested in those ideas before those ideas reach the boiling point of the Second World War and genocides and all those kind of things. So I don't want to visit the scenes of 1940s fascism and Nazism to Ion Dragoumis, but they're thinking of that. Again, what is fascism but an attempt, or at least a claim, that we are here to rejuvenate the nation. We are here to put aside that decadent democratic traditions and institutions who are not really democratic, and bring true democracy through mobilization of the people and all those wonderful ideas that clearly they sold, as we see in the ballot box and elsewhere in post World War II Greece. Now, Greece as a pillar of Euroscepticism, yes and no. Very recently, on justifying Greece's support for Ukraine, the Greek Prime Minister said, "We are the West. Greece is part of the West." I think he used the term, "We are also part of the West." Now, he's a conservative, but let's not forget that in 2015, when a left-wing party was in power, and there was a plebiscite, a referendum, and the people voted overwhelmingly to confront the European Union, there was an opportunity. If the left wanted to push on the European Union, they backed off. My estimation is that Greece, rhetoric aside, has chosen to be a Western country. And maybe it's part of, again, if you want to be the romantic idea, how can the West be West without Greece, or something like that? But at the end of the day, and Greece has decided by deed, by making choices from the music the Greeks like to listen to the political systems they favor. And certainly after communism, there's not even the East as an alternative political idea. We have the fringes that right now in Greece are supporting Putin because they like nationalism, and Putin represents the Soviet Union that disappeared, and so on and so forth. But we are talking about a minority that at the end of the day is not important in the electoral process. They are there. The Communist Party of Greece has 5-6% of the vote, and there are a couple of extreme right-wing parties that among themselves, all of them may have 10 or 15% of the vote or something like that, but they are never the arbiters of political developments in Greece. Yes.
We have one more question here. I think we have time just for one quick question. Anna Tahinci, I think I'm saying your name wrong. Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation. Could you please share more about the book that he wrote about the inhabitants of Asia Minor and got translated into French?
Yes, this is I have not read the whole book. I've read parts of it. It's difficult to find these days. I know Anna reads very good French. So if she got hold of it, I'm sure she read it. He was a little bit of an amateur ethnologist. He wrote a book as a very young man after he spent some time in the Greek countryside in like 1902, 1903, Letters from the Mountains, in which he explains, coming face to face with the Greeks of the mountains. And so there are two things there. On the one hand, it's ethnographic. On another, it involves statistics. Mm-hmm. Ethnic population. And here I must say, I am always suspicious of population statistics of the Balkans and the Near East in 1910, 1920, because everybody has them and everybody has different numbers that miraculously support their cause, right? So you find out there are more Greeks in this part and fewer Bulgarians, and of course the Bulgarian statistics are the other way around, and so on and so forth. So I am a bit skeptical of his numbers, but I would bet that his ethnological comments are worth today, of course, looking at them as a mirror to a world long gone.
I wonder, Sarah, since I'm the oldest in the group, I like to just take a minute, first of all, to thank the department for this, Clayton for arranging this. I kind of live in the shadows myself these days, so it's really wonderful to see so many faces. I'm not going to start mentioning names, but you have gladdened my soul, those faces that I recognize. And this has been a good session. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you.
Yes, and that's, in a minute, we'll have an opportunity when the formal program ends, if you'd like to stay on the line and sort of informally greet friends and former students and professors and so forth and ask a few more questions, you can do that. But let me first formally thank both John and Theo for this really fascinating conversation. Thank all of you who tuned in this evening to listen and learn about this interesting book and this interesting figure. To invite you, if you're so inclined, to support our graduate program, and that is generating the Books of the Future clubs. And I think Clayton will put a link if you're interested in supporting that. You'll receive a recording of this event in the email for those of you who are here and registered. Our next book club meeting will be Thursday, an off date, a Thursday, April 13th, when our faculty member Igor Chukarin will be talking to alum Todd Cleveland about his book, A History of Tourism in Africa. So if you're interested, come back and join us for that. But with that, I will close out the formal program, and we can thank our guests. And then if you'd like to stay on and thank them personally and informally, there's an opportunity for that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.